Hey sellers, Rob here, bringing you another tutorial. This is going to carry on with Offboard Artillery 301. It takes place after the previous two, and we're going to start talking about the 7 different kinds of missions that you can draw with OBA, as well as Bombardment, how that works. We'll put that at the end. So we have a lot to get through, so make sure you use the chapter headings for the type of fire mission that you want to learn about, and that way you can just skip ahead, because we're probably going to be pushing an hour for this one here. Let's get started. So let's look at fire missions now. So a fire mission starts once you have successful battery access with a chit draw, and it ends when you have a continuation on the board. After this, you must make a new access chit draw in order to start a fresh mission all over again. It doesn't matter what your mission type is, this is the general sequence. Now there are 7 possible fire missions, and we're going to look at each one in somewhat detail. We have an HE concentration. We have a smoke concentration, and a white phosphorus is treated exactly like a smoke. We also have an HE harassing. We have illumination rounds. And then we have HE smoke barrages. And then finally a creeping barrage. Now you cannot switch missions types during the course of a single fire mission. So for example, you cannot drop an FFE1 smoke and that phase, and then for your FFE2, drop an HE. You cannot do that. You must do either or for the complete fire mission. So you cannot switch mission types during a single fire mission. All fire missions, with the exception of illumination round, must be announced prior to any accuracy die roll when the FFE1 appears. So as long as you're bouncing around a spotting round, for example, you do not have to roll it, but the minute you want to convert that spotting round, or for pre-register you want to convert that AR, you must announce the mission type, with the exception. Illumination round is the only fire mission for which you must announce it prior to doing a chit draw. But for all other types, the minute that FFE1 appears, you must also announce the mission type at that time. For an HE, including harassing and a white phosphorus fire mission, attacking in the FFE1, 2, or continuation, continuously attacks throughout those phases until that continuation is removed. Any unit that enters the blast area. Again, you can enter in through those 4 phases you see there, movement phase, route phase. You could advance in or out, and close combat as well. Should you, for example, win ambush, you may be able to withdraw, and if your next hex overs an HE or a barrage of some kind, then you may have to suffer that kind of attack. But generally speaking, as long as you're not making yourself more vulnerable in moving inside one of those templates, then you'll not be attacked. So, for example, if you have a broken unit up on a 2nd level building and he wants to route down to the ground level, that's where his leader is, he would become more protected and therefore he would not be susceptible to attack. So just remember that. For this scenario setup, what we're going to do is we're going to have an American observer up on a hill, concealed with a radio. He's going to be directing 120mm OBA. And we're going to have some Germans set up in various positions inside this village. And they have their own mortar OBA 80mm, courtesy of this HIP observer with a field phone. Let's unhip him for now, just so you can see him. But normally he would be treated as HIP. Whenever you have an FFE landing, you should always resolve it against every empty hex, for example, M4, O4, and 5, because you never know what's there. There could be HIP units. You could create fire rubble in the wood buildings. You could create shell holes depending on the caliber size for open area, and or any minefields and fortifications have a chance of being eliminated as well as weapons that are unpossessed. In addition, you may have HIP units in various locations and or field phone security area. For example, the field phone here, the security area would have to run off to the rear somewhere. You might have a chance of cutting those lines as well. So even though you drop an FFE in this location and you only have 2 targets, you nonetheless should roll for all 7 hexes, and just on the off chance there might be something there. Each FFE that is in the FFE1 and FFE2 that is attacking in the prep fire and defensive fire phase is resolved directly on the IFT versus all units, except for those that you can see there. Aerial units, obviously, you will not be impacted. If you're in a tunnel or a sewer, you will not be. If you're a non-vulnerable passenger, riders, and crew, again, usually you share the fate of your vehicle, and certain climbing units. Now, when it refers to B1142, what they're talking about, of course, is units that are climbing. Say, for example, we have a unit here climbing. Because he's not at the base level, he would not be impacted by the FFE, which always... Now, indirect fire IFT resolution is always subject to TEM. However, there are some exceptions. For example, if an OBA landed on top of our observer here, yes, he has height advantage to anything lower. However, he would not get any terrain effect modifier from having that height advantage. Also, if you're a crest status on a deer, hillock, or dune crest, again, you do not receive any terrain effect from vertical or indirect fire, only from direct fire through certain arcs sometimes. Walls and bocage are treated as one lower, so you do only get a +1 if you were to have wall advantage, for example. And a target like this tank is never considered hull down to indirect fire as well. So even though direct fire, he may get some protection for these three arcs, with indirect fire, he will not get any protection at all. Airburst apply for targets in woods, so should this land over here, you would get a -1 for being in woods. However, that can be offset by adjacent terrain. For example, the wall would be a +1 if you have wall advantage. It was to cancel out the -1 for the airburst. Similarly for here, for gun shields, normally gun shields for some weapons give you a +2. However, with an indirect fire, that is lowered to a +1, which again would negate the -1 for airburst. Firepower of an FFE is never halved versus concealed units. It does not cower, nor does it produce duds. So if you ever roll 12, normally for to kill die rolls, that would be considered a dud. It does not apply with OBA. When it comes to friendly units caught in, say for example, it was our 7-0 that called in this danger close mission there. We have some Americans coming up quickly, and he had to drop an FFE right there. Normally his morale would be lowered. However, because he's an observer who deliberately called it in his own position, his morale is not impacted. However, should these units have been inside this building, their morale would be lowered because they're caught under a friendly template. The only other exceptions to that morale lowering were those 4 detailed above: aerial, those in tunnels and sewers, any non-vulnerable PRC, and again, certain climbing units. You would not be susceptible to morale loss because you would not be impacted by OBA. Anybody else, again, with the exception of our observer calling in danger close, would be impacted, losing 1 morale. Again, obviously, if you're non-heroic and non-berserk only. Those other two, berserk and heroic, will never suffer that morale loss. All right, let's focus in on HE concentration first. So, as we saw above in the templates, an FFE concentration consists of a target hex and the 6 hexes that are adjacent to it. It has a blast height of 2, measured from the base level of the hex, and if it's any caliber 50mm or greater, there's a chance of flame creation. If you have 70mm or greater, then there's also the possibility of rubble. And for stone buildings, it would have to be a minimum of 8 because 80mm, because there's always a +1 when it comes to stone. And what you need to do is roll a subsequent die roll less than or equal to your original die roll to create rubble. So for example, if we look at our IFT and the Americans firing on the 120, which would be the 24 column, say we roll a 3, what would be a 2 KIA, and we want to attack a stone building, we would have to roll 1 die that is less than or equal to 2, and we add a +1 to that die because of the stone construction, which means therefore in this case we would need a 1 plus 1 would be 2, so that would get us our chance of rubble. Any affected level is determined by random selection. So for example, let's do an IFT roll. We get a 4. 4 on the 120 is a a 1 KIA, so we would have no chance of rubbling stone. However, if we roll a 1, we have a chance of rubbling wood. So let's do that. Oh, okay, good luck. So we do have rubble. For example, this is our FFE right here. We would not be able to rubble the stone. We might be able to rubble wood. Now we rolled a 1, which equaled the KIA number that we needed, and therefore we have a chance of rubble. Determined by random selection. So we'll go first level, bottom level. So in this case, the bottom level is rubbled. Now, say for example, we had inverted those and we rolled a 5 for the bottom and a 6 for the top. You quite simply just put a level counter underneath the rubble, and that denotes that there still is a ground floor in this location, but there is no upper floor. Again, refer you to the Chapter B rules on rubble and how that exactly works. Now, there's also the next step. One is we did roll a KIA result, so then we have a chance of flame. And in addition, we also must roll to see if we collapse the whole building. So first of all, we roll 1 die, to which we add +1 because of the level that was rubbled. And if it's a 6 or more, then the hex is rubbled itself. So we roll this 1 die, we only got a 2, so the hex is not rubble. Now we have a chance of falling rubble because an upper level rubbled. So there's always a chance whenever you rubble an upper level of rubble falling into the adjacent hex. So to figure that out, you roll 2 dice with the colored die denoting it has to be a 7 or more for falling rubble. So you add a +1 for every level that's rubbled. In this case, we add a +1 to the 2 is 3 is not enough. You need to have a 7 or more in a colored die in order for it to fall. Had this been a 5, had this been a 6, we would add the +1 for that first level that was rubbled. It would fall into direction 4, so it would fall down here. Had that been a building, then there's a chance you might rubble that building and a continuous chain, so forth. So just remember, again, this is all in the rubble rules. It's kind of outside the purview of what I'm talking about, but for your purpose, just so you understand. When it comes to shell hole creation, it has to be 150 millimeter or greater to generate shell holes. So if we land here, say for example, and we're rolling for L2, certain terrain types, including grain, orchards, and brush, will be removed and replaced with the applicable counter. So if we get a K result in L2, for example, the grain would be removed and it would get replaced with a shell hole. So that grain that inherent terrain no longer exists. And again, that applies to grain, orchard, and brush. The FFE blast height produces a total of +1 for any line of sight measured through it, into it, or out of it. So it's a maximum +1 for the entire 7 hexes. And then finally, rocket OBA. So if we have a rocket, all right, let's say that instead of 80 millimeter mortar, we're looking at 150 plus rocket OBA. And we have a pre-registered hex here in G6. Again, rocketry is never accurate. It always deviates. So the first thing you would do is you would call in your artillery request. All right, you roll your dice to see where it lands. Again, it cannot be accurate, so there's no single die roll. You roll 2 dice. Colored die is the distance, and you have it rounding up because we have a pre-registered hex. So in this case, we would land in direction 4 for 1 hex. If we did not have a pre-registered hex and we had an AR, we make our roll. We go 2 for 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've just kind of ruined our day. First of all, we've landed off target, and we have, actually that's only 4, so let's go 5. We've landed off target, and we've impacted ourselves as well. So in this case, this 7-0, even though he called it in, because it inaccurately landed where he did not want it, his morale will be lowered, so he'd actually be a 6 morale. and this tank would be affected, as well as possible rubble creation in these two hexes, as well as those hexes as well. And again, shell hole creation as well, all from friendly fire. So just remember, with rocketry, it's never accurate, it's never corrected. All you get is an FFE1 and an FFE2, and then once your next fire phase rolls around, your continuation comes off. If you have a pre-registered hex, then any extent of error is halved, rounded up. So if you ever have the opportunity to have a pre-registered hex with your rocket, make sure you take advantage of it, especially when you're dealing with your own troops in close proximity. All right, so let's talk about smoke before we get too much into it. Anytime smoke is fired in the prep fire phase by ordnance or OBA smoke, it always comes in as +3. It lasts in +3 form until your next prep fire phase, during which it's changed to +2 dispersed smoke, which then lasts until your next prep fire phase, after which it's gone. If you fire smoke in the defensive fire phase, it always comes in as +2 dispersed, and it will be gone on your next prep fire phase. So if this is a German FFE2, he drops +2 dispersed smoke. When it comes to his next turn, in the beginning of the prep fire phase, all that +2 smoke comes off, and all his +3 counters get flipped over to their dispersed side. So just remember that smoke in the prep fire phase comes in at +3. In the defensive fire phase, it always comes in at +2. Now, when it comes to drifting smoke, again, assuming we have a wind and we have a mild breeze, we'll have drifting smoke appearing every advancing phase. Advancing fire phase. So in the advancing fire phase, every source of smoke will be dispensing its own dispersed smoke as well. So, and it's based on the LOS hindrance of the source. So we have +3 smoke gives off 3 dispersed smoke counters, +2 smoke gives off 2. Should we have a blaze in terrain, again, even though it might be a higher level hindrance, it only will ever give off 2 smoke counters. And similarly with a AFV, say AFV is destroyed, it's on fire. Normally it is a level 4 hindrance, but it will only ever give off 2 smoke counters in a mild breeze. Right? Now, should, say for example, the American roll for wind change and he gets direction change. Oops, that's not what I want to do. So should the American roll in his rally phase and get a wind change, all that happens in that rally phase is all your dispersed smoke goes away. And again, in the advancing fire phase, you now have new smoke laid in the correct orientation. So again, +3 gives off 3. Everything else gives off a +2. And so forth. Now, if we have gust all of a sudden or heavy winds, dispersed smoke disappears in heavy winds or gusts. So all this comes off. And any +3 smoke is switched to its dispersed side. Any +2 dispersed smoke is gone. So anytime you have heavy winds, anytime you have gusts, all dispersed smoke is gone, and any +3 smoke is changed to +2 smoke. So again, in this case, we start off with +3. Defensive fire phase stays at a +3. The American rolls for wind change and he gets gusts. That means all dispersed smoke is gone and +3 turns to +2. And then therefore in the next German turn, since your smoke's already down to +2, it comes off. So just by the American rolling gust, you've eliminated all this of different kind of smoke that you could have had on the board. That's why the wind change die roll is so important. All right, so all that being said, let's go back to our example here. So there's a couple of other things about smoke you have to know, that if the ECs are mud or deep snow, you cannot have any smoke. If you land in a marsh or water obstacle, you cannot have any smoke, again, unless it's on a bridge. And during any kind of rain and or heavy wind or gusts, as I said, you will not have any smoke generated. Remember that offboard smoke can impact some units. So if, for example, we have a smoke source here in this house and this board does not exist, it's offboard, and we have wind, again, blowing in this direction, we would have dispersed smoke appearing offboard, which could impact things like an offboard observer. Say, for example, we had an offboard observer in this hex. Remember, you're not physically occupying K10, you're just using that to measure all your lines of sight. You would be impacted by your smoke. Last thing is, smoke always appears at ground level. So again, say it appeared here, and for whatever reason there was a level 3 location in here. This unit would be above the smoke and therefore would not be impacted by it. So it's only going to be a level 2 hindrance at of any type, and it's always measured from the base. So again, if we have a gully, it would impact ground level and level 1, and a level 2 building would be fine if it landed in a smoke gully. It's always from the base level of the hex. All right, say we have white phosphorus mission instead, and we have a couple more units down here. Say on the ground level. First thing you must remember is that white phosphorus for OBA purposes consists of 2 rolls. All right, so the first roll is going to be from you, the attacker, to determine if it's a critical hit and or for flame creation. And the second will be your opponent actually taking his white phosphorus normal morale check. Now, those normal morale checks are adjusted by the terrain you're in. So, for example, we're in a stone building, so these units would get a -3 to their morale check. So the chances are they'll probably make it. Unless you roll a critical hit, in which case you invert that as a positive modifier. So say, for example, we roll a critical hit, snake eyes on the ground floor, we would add a +3 to the die roll for their morale check. So again, 2 die rolls. The first is by you for checking for critical hit and flame, and the second is for the white phosphorus normal morale check your opponent has to take. Now, when it comes to flame creation, this is only possible in dry or very dry conditions. It's only those 2 kinds of EC that you can generate flame from white phosphorus. However, any unit subjected to a white phosphorus NMC will automatically lose any concealment. It will cause DM status, assuming that they live through it, and but only if an LOS of a good order enemy. So again, if in this particular case, because of all the modifiers, these guys would actually be blind, they would actually keep their concealment. All right, so just remember that with white phosphorus. Again, if you get a critical hit off that first roll, you invert the terrain. So rather than a -3, in this case, it would be a +3, and or possible flame creation. But again, only in dry or very dry EC conditions. All right, so let's look at harassing fire. So again, the template is going to be the center hex as well as 2 hex radius around it. They're all going to be impacted at 1/3 of the firepower. So again, if you have a 100 millimeter, for example, you would be firing on the 6 table, as well as if you're on the 24 120 millimeter, you would be firing on the 8 table, again, because it's 1/3 of the firepower. So you can see the differences in dice rolls. Therefore, whenever you're in dense urban terrain, when you start adding +3, maybe 4 for fortified locations, then it quickly becomes less likely you're going to get a decent result. So I would probably avoid using harassing fire in urban areas unless you have a case like this where you have a mixture of units in various soft locations that you might be able to impact. It's a larger template, so you can hit more. However, it's less effective in the long run. It still maintains its +2 blast radius, blast height, measured from the hex's base level. And it does not create an LOS hindrance for fire coming through it, into it, or out of it. And again, typically it's represented by a blue counter. Now, whether or not you choose to use this in proximity of your own troops probably would depend upon their the way that they're situated. So say, for example, we have German harassing fire, and we have units located in this hex here on the ground floor. They would be protected with a total +3 as opposed to a -1 for this unit. So a +3, if say it was 80 millimeter, 80 millimeters on the 16 table, so that would bring you down to the 4. On the 4 table, +3, the best you can get would be a 5. So that would be a 1 morale check if you roll snake eyes. Well, actually, that would be double for critical. But again, because you're much better protected, yes, your morale will be lower for friendly fire, but if it's a danger close kind of situation, you may want to take that risk, but only if your own units are better protected than your opponents. Again, Dave used this tactic on me in our Crisis at Kasserine, where you had Americans dug in entrenchments, and I had some Italians advancing through open ground, and he wisely decided to drop an FFE harassing on my guys, even though his guys could have been in the template. In that particular case, luckily for him, he deviated onto me, not him, but he would have been protected with a +4, and my Italians moving in the open would not have any protection at all. So there is a case to be made for using harassing fire with your own troops inside the blast radius. But again, it's strictly dependent on what kind of protection they're getting. If they're in a stone building like this here, for example, they would get a total of +5, 3 for the building, and another +2 for the first and second levels. So +5 versus a -1, you could probably risk that for harassing fire purposes. But again, if you're going to be in the middle of a dense urban terrain, not that this is really dense, you're going to be less impactful if everything's protected with buildings. So just remember that. All right, so let's look at illumination rounds. Now, unlike a normal onboard mortar, say, for example, we have a German 81. Look at the info, you can see it's IR capable, and therefore it would have to make a usage die roll prior to being able to use it. That does not apply with OBA. You just have to make a chit draw to get it. You must announce prior to your chit draw that you're intending to fire IR. And when you do it, just be aware that you're going to be illuminating a 6 hex radius, as we saw. And it fires in the same fashion as a spotting round. So remember, 6 hex radius around the IR. It comes in as a single round, even though you might have your fire missions kept track of on the side. So you have your FFE1. And then once this turn is done, again, it flips over to FFE2, end of the close combat phase. This would disappear. The next phase, you bring it on again. And at the end of the fire phase, you would flip it over to FFEC. And at the end of that turn, it would be gone as well at the end of close combat after any concealment is gained. So you keep track of it off board, your FFEC, FFE1s and 2s. And you only ever put down the 1 round regardless. So with the original chit draw, what happens is the it gets returned to the draw pile, so you'd never permanently lose a black chit for firing IR. And again, it's treated much like a star shell. Now, star shells have three methods to be applied, to be used. We don't deal with the first one with regards to the OBA. We only have method 2 and method 3. Now, method 2 is if you have a gun flash. So first of all, let's set the NVR. All right. And we'll set it at 3. All right, so we have a 3 NVR, night vision radius of 3, which means any unit can see a maximum of 3 hexes. So right now, this tank would be out of line of sight. This unit would not be known, but they would be in line of sight. All right, so we have a 3 NVR. Anything beyond 3, you require a gun flash or some kind of illumination to see them. Now, when it comes to known enemy unit and AFVs, any vehicle that has been that has moved, gained motion, or has changed vehicle covered arc, as long as you're within 1.5 times the NVR, rounded up. So in this case, it would be 5 hexes. They're considered a known enemy. So while a ground unit would have to be within 3 to be seen, vehicles, in this case, you can be within 5. Again, provided you've moved, are in motion, or have changed your vehicle covered arc. If you do any of those 3, then your vehicle will be considered known to the to your opponent. And or a gun flash. So if we fire a gun flash from this unit here, we'll use this guy here. All right, so this unit here has a gun flash on them. Therefore, they would be visible to any unit. Even if we have one of these 747s up here on the hill, they would be able to see this unit because, again, the gun flash illuminates them. So they would be considered known. So if we want to fire a IR round, this leader up here could use the gun flash from this unit to call in his IR mission using method 2. If we have no gun flash and we're not in motion, then we have to use method 3. So method 2, again, is for a gun flash and known enemy. Okay, we rolled a 7 for a radio contact. Then we do a chit draw, assuming we get black, and we put our AR down where we want to in proximity to the, along the line, excuse me, between you and your target. Now, with method 2 and star shells, normally you have to be a minimum of 6 hexes away from you, so row N. However, with OBA, that restriction does not apply. You can be anywhere along this line. I'll put it at 9. I could put it at 1. I could put it right over me. It's going to deviate regardless. So I'm going to choose L2, or actually we'll choose M3. We can make a random location having the extent of error rounding up. So again, we have a direction 3 for 3. So the final IR shell would land 1, 2, 3 hexes away. Again, at the end of the close combat phase, after any concealment gain has occurred in these locations, the IR would be gone. That's for method 2. So if you look at method 3 for all other placements, you must pick a hex that is at least 6 away from you and any multiples of 6 thereafter. So again, we can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We could go there. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We can go there, or 18. So multiples of 6 away from you. We're going to choose 6. And again, we're going to roll random location. However, this time we do not have the color die. So in this case, we're going 4 for 5. So our final IR location will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hexes away. So that's more or less a Hail Mary, just throwing it up on the off chance that you can see something. All right, finally, let's talk about the Chapter E12 Special Fire Missions. This is going to be your barrages. Now, we're going to discuss the FFHE barrage, but all the same rules apply for smoke, including orientation and what it looks like. So basically, your barrage is going to be 9 hex long, 1 hex wide, whether it's smoke or HE. If it's HE, it is always resolved 1 column to the left of normal. So again, if you look at our chart here, say we're firing 120 millimeter OBA, we would actually be resolving it on the 20 table for resolution, because we're always one left of our strength. You're only allowed to have a barrage if you have at least one pre-registered hex, maybe more. In order to use a barrage, you must make it barrage capable. And how you do that is you pick your pre-registered hex, in this case G4, and then you pick 2 hexes on either side of it to determine orientation. So for us, it's going to be G3 and G5. You could have F3, H4, etc. You just pick the 2 hexes on either side of the barrage to set orientation. So our orientation is going to look just like this. Once you've done that, your pre-registered hex is now barrage capable. And when it comes to laying down a barrage, you do not use a spotting round. You go directly to an FFE, and hopefully it'll be on target. So in this case, we need a 4 or less from our off-board observer to see if we can get a target round. In this case, roll a 6, so our barrage will not be accurate. So again, because it's pre-registered, we have the color die, so we're going to go 1 for 1. So our final location for our barrage is 1 for 1, and it gets resolved in that fashion. Now, because our FFE is slightly off of our pre-arranged, pre-registered barrage capable hex, we're not able to correct it because we're adjacent to our pre-registered hex. However, should our hex have landed 2 away, we can always attempt to correct it towards your barrage pre-registered hex. Again, you can go in it or beside it. If you start in it or beside it, you cannot correct. So you must be at least 2 hexes away if you want to correct your barrage. And if you correct it, it must always be towards your pre-registered hex. So our FFE barrage counts as a +1 hindrance, just like a normal HE concentration. And we can always use this pre-registered barrage capable hex for other normal OBA missions, concentrations, harassing fire, etc. You're not limited to barrage if you have a barrage capable pre-registered hex. And the same applies for smoke. So if you bring in a smoke barrage, again, it would be the same thing. 9 hexes long, 1 hex wide. Really good for screening off positions. I could see most people using a barrage capable hex for that purpose. If you especially have a mild breeze, you start having drifting smoke coming off of it, it provides a nice screen for your troops, especially if you're trying to get through a minefield. This is what I ended up doing for the crisis at Kasserine. When I had a bunch of Germans and a minefield to go through, I screened it off with a shitload of smoke so that they could start working on the minefield without being shut up. Problem with an with an HE barrage, however, is you're sometimes quite limited on its effectiveness. Like in this case, if I landed on target, I would only hit these 2. Secondly, because I must choose my pre-registered hex before any setup, I have no idea where anybody's going to be set up. So I could more or less see your barrage being used for smoke layman, not so much HE. But that's essentially how you use a barrage. It's a HE concentration that is in a straight line, 9 hexes long by 1 hex wide. Alright, let's talk about the creeping barrage. Again, this is chapter E12.7. Now, it follows the similar rules for barrage, except it's only available to the scenario attacker. Usually, you are not assigned a radio and an observer. It's just all pre-planned, and therefore it goes off without that, and therefore line of sight is not required. However, should a SSR assign you a radio for that battery, you can continue to use it for normal OBA actions, using the existing draw pile after you make the 1 draw for your creeping barrage. Any barrage capable pre-registered hex, in this case we're going to choose C5, must run parallel to the board of entry, board edge of entry for your units. So we have Americans off board, Germans are on board. The Americans are going to come on from the left side, therefore the creeping barrage must parallel that board edge. There are several things that you must do prior to any setup from your opponent, and that is you must pick a pre-registered barrage capable hex, which means you assign a pre-registered hex, and you identify the two adjacent hexes to orientation. Again, C5 is our prereq hex. C4, C6 determines orientation. You must also pick an aim point, which the creeping barrage is always heading for. And then you must figure out your timing. You have two choices, either every prep fire phase for you or every fire phase. Now the difference would be you would drop an FFE1 on your prep fire, say, and the German turn your defensive fire, you would advance. In your next prep fire phase, you would advance, and so forth until you reach your aiming point. You can see that it's a much quicker rate of advancement. If you do it every prep fire phase, however, then you would fire an FFE1 on your turn. You'd fire an FFE2 on the German turn. Your next American turn, you would advance. You would fire FFE1 on your turn, again on the German turn, and so forth. And you can see it's a much better saturation of potentially of the enemy as you advance towards your aiming point. But you have to decide prep fire or prep fire and defensive fire. And you must also determine how many turns this is going to last before it lifts. So for us, I'm going to choose prep fire. I'm going to choose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 missions. So it's going to lift on turn 6. All this has to be plotted out and planned prior to any setup. So again, you have no idea where the enemy forces are going to be. Hopefully they land underneath your hexes. So we're going to advance in the prep fire phase only. We're going to do 5 turns of creeping barrage, and then we're going to lift on turn 6. So all that's established. Now you set up your forces off board. The enemy forces are already set up on board, and now we have to determine whether or not our timing is on or off. That's done by doing a chit draw. So we look at our OBA. Again, this is going to be 120 millimeter. It's going to be American, so normally they have 10 black and 3 red because they always have plentiful ammunition. However, they also got a pre-registered hex, so now they have 11. So you do a chit draw. If it's black, like it is here, that means that it is barrage is on time. When it comes to the first prep fire, your barrage will commence and then carry on until you reach turn 6 when it ceases. However, should you draw a red chit, that means you have a delay. A delay is a number of pre-game turns of barrage that will occur prior to scenario commencement. This is determined by a die roll that's halved and rounded up. So we roll a die, we have a 3, halve it 1.5, round up to 2, which means we're going to be having 2 turns of pre-game barrage prior to the scenario start. So we start off, again, everything's set up now. So pre-game turn 1, we bring in our artillery request. We do our accuracy die roll 1 to 4, so we're not accurate. We can only be off 3 hexes, so we're going to have and round up the colored die, which is really horrible. We're going to go 1 for 3. So our FFE is already doing shittily. It's landing off target. And our barrage aim point adjusts so that it's always parallel to the FFE. Alright, in the pre-game turn 1 defensive fire phase, this gets resolved as an FFE2, and then it switches to concentration at the end. That's the first pre-game turn. Now we're into the second pre-game turn, and we want to keep moving. So because of the orientation is now moved to the north, we must continue in that fashion. So you always place your AR 2 hexes away. You make your accuracy die roll, which now will be a 1 or a 2 because it's not a pre-registered. So we're accurate. So our FFE-C comes in as an FFE-1, gets resolved, and then it gets switches to FFE-2. Now we must do the pre-game turn 2 German turn. So again, our FFE gets resolved as a continuation, and now we can actually start the scenario. So it starts off with your next prep fire phase. In turn 1, you put your AR down. Again, you're always going towards your barrage aim point. And you do your accuracy die roll from there. So this time it's accurate, and we're going to be landing on here. All right, we resolve it against all units, and then they get flipped over. That should have been FFE1. It should get resolved as an FFE2. Then we switch to the German defensive fire phase. We resolve the FFE2, and it's now a continuation. So now in our next turn prep fire phase, remember we only said we're doing 5 turns, so we only got 2 more lifts. We again place our AR 2 hexes away towards the barrage aim point, and we roll for accuracy. Again, we're off, so the most we can be off is 1 hex because we're only moving 2. So we pick a direction for 3. So this time our FFE is going to land over here as an FFE1. It gets resolved, and then it comes to an FFE2. In the next German phase in the defensive fire, the FFE2 gets resolved and then gets replaced with a concentration. And then finally, in your last turn, it is now turn 3. We were hoping to get 5 turns of fire while we're on the board. We only got 3. So again, we must adjust 2. We're going to move 2 hexes over. Again, we do our accuracy. We got a 1. So again, we're accurate. Gets resolved as an FFE1 in your turn. And then in the German turn 3, in the defensive fire phase, it gets resolved as an FFE2. And then continuation, and then it lifts when it's your next turn. All right, that's a convoluted way for a creeping barrage to work. Just remember that if you draw black, it goes off on time. So in the first turn prep fire, hopefully it lands on target, and then you can advance up behind it as it does its business. If, however, you draw a red chit, then that means that your pre-game barrage is delayed, and then you must roll a die, have it rounding up for the number of turns, i.e. 1 to 3, for which you must run a complete cycle of barrage. A creeping barrage, unlike a normal barrage, gives you a +2 line of sight hindrance because they would intersperse smoke rounds with the HE just to help cover the advancing troops. However, if you have rain in effect or deep snow, then the LOS hindrance is only going to be a +1. But that's a creeping barrage. Which brings us to bombardment. So this is going to be the last phase. Bombardments are typically invoked by SSR. You could purchase ability with design your own, or sometimes some modification depending on the historical module you're playing, some variation of this. But typically it is 1 map board or 2 half boards that will be affected. So if you have a multi-board setup, only 1 should be impacted by the bombardment. The bombardment's carried out after setup, but prior to scenario commencement. So in this case, we have our German setup and defense, and we're going to do a bombardment now prior to the actual scenario commencement. Now, how you do that is you roll 6 dice. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3. And doubles are not re-rolled. And then we're going to roll 3 more dice, and we're going to add 6 to it. So 4, 5, 6. So in this case, we have 1, 4, and then we add 6 to the last 3, so we're going to have a 9, a 12, and a 7. So 9 and 7. All right, and again, duplicates are not re-rolled. You just take out it just means less hexes are affected. So these 6 die rolls determine which hexes are going to be exempt from bombardment. So because of duplication, and in this case, because we exceeded 10, orientation is going to be 1, 4, 7, and 9 will miss bombardment. Everything else will have to take one. All right, so we again roll 1, roll 4, roll 7, and roll 9 will be exempt bombardment. Every other unit, bridge, building, location will have to suffer a corresponding attack. So now, again, this is all pre-game. Now we do morale checks, and we start with terrain first, and then we do personnel, and then we do things like tanks and other unmanned equipment. So in this, we start off with row 2. We find a woods or building, a building or bridge within row 2. So we have one here. So S2 is our first one. So we must take a morale check with an 8. We exceeded it, which means it's now rubbled. All right, and we find anything else in row 2? No. So then we do row 3. We find our first unit. In this case, we have an infantry unit. And infantry personnel must take a 2 morale check, adding any terrain as a negative die roll modifier. Again, because they're in woods, it counts as airburst, so they're actually going to get a +1 to the die, which basically means they need a 4 or less to avoid breaking, so we roll that. Again, they rolled a 7, so let's say that's within their ELR, so they're just going to be broken. If, on the other hand, I had exceeded my morale and rolled doubles, they would have suffered casualty reduction. Now, they still retain concealment because there's no friendly units on board, and we continue to go. So now we have an AFV. Again, AFVs have a morale, this case, because the armor factors are greater than 4. We would get a morale of 9. We make it with an 8, so the tank is fine. If I had failed by 1, this tank would have been immobilized. If it was 2, it would have been eliminated with crew survival, and a 3 would be a burning wreck. So let me continue on doing 3. So T3 is our next one. Again, it's a wood building. Wood buildings have a morale of 8, so I made it. So then we look up rest of row 3, nothing. Row 4 we skip, and then we go through row 5. So here we have another unit. Again, they'll be at a net +3. It's a 2 morale check with an extra +1 because of the airburst. So again, they need a 4 or less. So this time I rolled doubles. And so I exceeded my morale. I probably exceeded ELR. So let's ELR them. Reduce them to half squad. And now they are broken. Because I rolled doubles. We continue on row 5. We find the next bridge of wood. Nothing there. We do row 6. Again, we have another opponent here, and we have another +3 to the die roll. So this time he needs a 5 or less in order to not suffer, and he exceeded his morale, but probably his ELR is fine, so he's going to just break. And again, we continue down row 6. We have a wood obstacle here, a wood building, I should say. So again, morale is 8. I rolled an 8, so it's fine. Now this row here, P6, same thing. I rolled a 7, so the morale is passed, so it's fine. Again, we go through like that. And you continue on with row 8 and then with row 10 in the same fashion. That's basically how a bombardment works. So again, you do, in a hex, you do the terrain first. So if we had units here inside a building, you would do a morale check against the building first. Nothing happened. Now you would do your 2 morale check against infantry. Again, they would use their terrain as a modifier. In this case, it would be a -2. So they rolled a 3, so they're fine. That's how it worked sequence-wise. Again, it's terrain before the personnel in it. If, for example, say this unit was on the first level, and the first level was rubbled, the unit would be destroyed, and a rubble would exist in that counter, and these guys would be gone. So again, whenever you have a mix of personnel and material in a hex, the sequence is you always do the terrain, then the personnel, and then any equipment. And equipment is only done if the unit holding it fails. So let's say, for example, this half squad actually rolled a 12, so it would lose a half squad for rolling a 12 fate, and it would also lose a half squad because it rolled doubles for bombardment. And we now have just a weapon on the ground. The weapon itself will now have to take its own morale check. In this case, the guns and support weapon have a morale of 7, so I've equaled it, and that's great. If I rolled higher, well, a lot of low rolls. If I rolled one of these 8s, I would have exceeded it, and if I exceeded by 1, it would be malfunctioned. If I exceeded by 2, it would eliminate it. All right, so again, the sequence of events is if you have units in a terrain like this one here. Let's put them in this building. You can even have a tank and bypass. All right, so the sequence of events again is the terrain first. So we check to see if the building rubbles. This time we rolled a 12, which means it does rubble. And because we failed our morale by 4, it's rubbled right to the ground level. So first of all, this is gone. We put our rubble down. Now our AFE must make 2 rolls. One is for the bombardment and the other one is to avoid being rubbled. So the first roll is a morale check to see if anything happens to him. So I rolled a 9. Now a closed-topped AFV with an armor that is not less than or equal to 4 has a morale of 9, which means I've equaled it. So the vehicle is fine. Now I must make another roll to make sure that I am not bogged. So I rolled less than the bog number, so I'm not bogged. So I'm free to move out of this rubble hex. But again, all this bombardment happens prior to the scenario commencement, after all setup is complete. And that lengthy treatise was the 7 fire missions followed up with bombardment. So if you've made it this far, kudos. Comment down the video that you made it this far, please. It's quite involved when you start getting into the different missions and their types, but it's not overly complex once you've practiced OBA enough. So as a concluding remark, don't be afraid to try OBA. Once more, you have your OBA flowchart. If you have the books, or sorry, it came in one of the modules. And if you have the pocket-sized book, again, you'll also have an OBA flowchart in there. And again, highly recommended to use. It gives you all the steps you need on what you want to do with OBA. Hopefully this video has been of some use to you. If you've enjoyed the series, just let me know down in the comments below. Give me a thumbs up if you think I earned it. And we'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.